Welcome to another deep dive. If you're tuning in right now, you are probably someone who's constantly looking for that next big synthesis of ideas.
Hmm.
You're a learner. You want to understand the architecture of good ideas to get that aha moment, but you frankly just don't have the time to wade through an entire library to find it.
Right. Because who does?
Exactly. And that is exactly what we're doing today. Our mission for this deep dive is to take a remarkably dense, eclectic journal reflection. It's titled The Essential Art Essay.
Specifically the entry from March 6th, or day 65, yeah.
That one. And we're going to distill it into a cohesive masterclass on a very specific challenge, which is how to live with absolute total engagement while holding your expectations completely loosely.
It's a phenomenal synthesis of ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, what makes this particular material so compelling to me is that it forces a conversation between thinkers who would normally never, ever be in the same room.
Oh, the stack of sources we're pulling from today is genuinely wild. Like, we have William Shakespeare sitting right next to Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
We have the Bhagavad Gita cross-referenced with the management consultant Peter Drucker.
It's quite the dinner party.
It really is. There's wisdom from Anne Morrow Lindbergh, legendary basketball coach George Raveling, evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins. We even have brief nods to Dave Pell's breaking down the mechanics of the golf swing,
Right.
and Carol Welch looking at movement as medicine. It is a lot.
It sounds chaotic, I know, but there is a profoundly unified thread running through every single one of those perspectives. Everything centers around the Japanese concept of shoshin, which translates to beginner's mind.
Okay, beginner's mind.
But we have to be careful of that term, right? Because it's often misunderstood. People think it means a kind of naive innocence or just a lack of experience. And that is not what Shoshin is at all.
So how should we be framing it then for the listener?
Think of it as a very specific, highly cultivated quality of openness. It's the demanding discipline of actively resisting your own hardened assumptions.
Wow.
Yeah. In Zen philosophy, the true master isn't the person who has finally arrived at some ultimate state of knowing. The master is the one who never stops arriving. It's an active refusal to be burdened by the weight of what you think you already know.
To awaken the mind and open the heart, as the text puts it.
Exactly.
But applying that practically seems incredibly difficult, especially when you look at the first two ideas we're trying to reconcile today.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it. On one hand, you have Bruce Lee. His famous directive is, there are no limits, only plateaus, which is this relentless, fiery call to ambition. You hit a wall, you just break right through it.
Mm-hmm.
But right next to that, we have this instruction from the Bhagavad Gita that says, you have the right to work, but never to the fruit of work.
Right.
How do you reconcile pushing through a plateau if you aren't supposed to care about what happens when you get to the other side?
See, that tension is exactly the point. It's about uncoupling your engagement from the outcome. You are pushing through every plateau Bruce Lee talks about. You're pouring your entire soul into the endeavor, but you're doing it without making your core identity contingent on the reward.
Okay.
You're doing the work for the inherent value of the work itself.
Which, sounds great in a monastery, but let's test that in the real world. How does someone build a successful business or a career if they're completely indifferent to the fruit of their labor? Don't you have to care about the outcome to actually succeed?
Well, you would think so, right? But Peter Drucker's research into highly successful entrepreneurs suggests the exact opposite.
Really?
Yeah. We have this pervasive cultural myth that the great entrepreneurs are these reckless, adrenaline-fueled risk-takers,
Yeah.
betting everything on a single spin of the wheel.
Like the Silicon Valley stereotype.
Exactly. But Drucker found that the reality is entirely different. The best founders are incredibly methodical. They spend countless hours doing the completely unglamorous work of defining and minimizing risk. Drucker realized they are not risk-focused. They're opportunity-focused.
So the risk taker is addicted to the thrill of the bet, the outcome, while the opportunity-focused person is just deeply engaged in the mechanics of solving the problem itself.
Precisely. The outcome is almost incidental because they're so grounded in the process. It's essentially the Bhagavad Gita in a business suit.
The Bhagavad Gita in a business suit. I love that. And that actually perfectly explains the inclusion of Dave Pelz and his analysis of the golf swing.
Oh, yes.
Because Pelz points out that one of the most common ways amateur golfers just completely ruin a shot is by looking up too early to see where the ball is going.
Right, they peak.
They peak. They're so anxious about the outcome, the fruit of the work, that they abandon the mechanics of the swing before they've even made contact.
That is such a brilliant physical manifestation of the concept. The moment you shift your focus from the present action to the future result, you compromise your ability to perform.
Hmm.
To hit the ball well, you just have to be entirely committed to the swing itself, trusting that the outcome takes care of itself if the process is sound.
Which ties perfectly into the Japanese concept of Ganbaru.
Yes.
It translates roughly to doing your absolute best, persevering through difficulty, but with a fundamental detachment from the results. You attempt fully, without constantly looking over your shoulder to see if you're failing.
Yeah.
And that operates as this direct countermeasure to Shakespeare's famous warning from Measure for Measure, where he says, "Our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt."
Shakespeare pinpoints the exact tragedy of the outcome-focused life there. When we're paralyzed by our desire to control the result, we often refuse to even step up to the tee. Gamru removes that paralysis entirely.
But there's a secondary trap here, isn't there? Even if you manage to focus on the process and ignore the outcome, your brain is still constantly narrating the experience.
Always.
We're always telling ourselves stories about who we are and what our actions mean.
And that brings us to Nassim Taleb's concept of the narrative fallacy.
Right.
Human beings are deeply, deeply uncomfortable with randomness. So what we do is we look back at our lives, gather up completely unrelated past events, and just string them together into a neat, coherent story, one that makes our current situation seem inevitable.
We convince ourselves that every mistake and every triumph was just part of this grand, predetermined design that led us perfectly to today.
Exactly. And while those stories can feel super comforting, Taleb warns that they trap us.
How so?
Well, the Stoic philosopher Epictetus noticed this centuries ago when observing how people socialize. He advised strongly against recounting your past dangers and accomplishments at length.
Sure, because it makes you insufferable at a dinner party.
Well, yes, definitely that. But also because endlessly narrating who you were solidifies a really rigid self-image. It actively prevents you from accessing the beginner's mind. You cannot be open to the present if you are endlessly defending a curated story of your past.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, and I want to push back a little. Because George Raveling offers a really vital counterpoint to this idea of just abandoning your story.
He doesn't.
Raveling argues that your history, particularly your silently fought battles and your scars, are your substance. He wrote that if you stop trusting your own story, you inevitably hand your power over to someone else's interpretation of you.
It is a necessary paradox.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to take complete ownership of your history so that it cannot be weaponized against you.
Right.
But owning your story is very different from performing it or letting it dictate your future possibilities. You hold your history close, but you don't allow it to become a prison.
And when you fail to hold that story loosely, you lose your ability to perceive reality accurately. We see this in the historical irony of Seneca's exile.
Oh, this is such a great example.
It's amazing. He was banished to an island that he wrote about as if it were this barren, torturous wasteland. He was utterly miserable. But the island he was exiled to was Corsica.
A place that is now considered literally one of the most stunning, premium European vacation destinations in the Mediterranean.
The natural beauty, the mountains, the beaches, they were all right there. But Seneca was so consumed by his internal narrative of being a victim of unjust exile that he was completely blind to his actual surroundings.
He was entirely cut off from Shoshin. He couldn't see what was right in front of him. And overcoming that blindness is perhaps the most demanding aspect of this philosophy. It requires what the poet Maggie Smith refers to as seeing the good bones.
Looking at something that appears ruined and seeing the latent potential.
Yes, it's the ability to confront a situation that is objectively difficult or even devastating and perceive the foundation underneath that can still be built upon. It's such a vital skill for leaders, coaches, and really anyone trying to navigate life alongside other people.
There is a story about Coach Raveling that perfectly illustrates this kind of vision in action. He had a former player named James Donaldson.
Right, the NBA veteran?
Yeah, a 7'2" guy who played in the NBA for years, but he'd fallen into a severe compounding crisis. He was dealing with financial collapse, deep personal grief, profound depression. He was essentially at the absolute end of his rope when he reached out to his old coach.
And what's remarkable about Raveling's response is what he did not do. He didn't try to intellectualize Donaldson's pain, and he didn't offer empty platitudes or give a grand speech.
He just got in his car and drove to Donaldson's house, and then he did it again the next day and the day after that. He didn't demand that Donaldson immediately fix his life. He just offered a steady, unwavering presence. He basically just kept saying, I see you.
He saw the good bones in someone who could no longer see them in himself.
Donaldson eventually recovered, became a mental health advocate, and actually began doing for others exactly what Raveling had done for him.
That echoes Cleanthes, the Stoic philosopher. There's a story where he saw a man walking through Athens muttering to himself, just berating himself for his failures. Cleanthes simply stopped the man and said, "You are not talking to a bad person."
Wow. You are not talking to a bad person. That is the essence of what Raveling calls being a merchant of hope. It's the refusal to look at a human being and see only their brokenness.
But to be a merchant of hope, you have to relinquish your need to control people and outcomes. You have to adopt a posture of profound receptivity. Anne Morrow Lindbergh captured this beautifully in Gift from the Sea when she wrote about hunting for seashells.
Oh, this analogy is so beautiful. If you march down to the water with a bucket, frantic and anxious, demanding that the ocean give you the perfect shell, you usually walk away empty-handed.
Right.
Lindbergh says you have to approach the water empty, open, choiceless as a beach. You simply lie there and wait for whatever the tide decides to bring in.
Which is an incredibly vulnerable posture. It requires offering your full attention and effort without a tight-fisted expectation of the return. Epictetus used a really memorable analogy for this. He talked about a child who thrusts their hand into a narrow-necked candy jar.
The candy jar, right?
Yeah, the child grabs a massive fistful of sweets, but then realizes they cannot pull their hand back out because their fist is too wide.
They're completely trapped by their own refusal to let go.
Exactly. The clenched fist traps itself. Only the open hand can actually receive anything new. It's fascinating how rapidly we can synthesize how many different philosophical traditions arrive at this exact same mechanism.
They really all point to the same thing.
They do. Buddhism identifies this gripping reflex as willful will. The Stoics developed the art of acquiescence, which isn't passive surrender, but an active, disciplined trust in the unfolding of events outside your control. It's the foundation of amor fati, learning to actually love whatever fate hands you.
And the Japanese tradition approaches it through the concept of hara hachibu, which translates to eating until you're 80% full. It's a dietary practice, obviously, but it operates perfectly as a metaphor for living. You always leave a little bit of empty space. You never consume until you're completely satiated because you need to leave room for the unexpected.
If you fill every single corner of your life with your own demands and expectations, you leave zero room for reality to surprise you. Aesop warned about this in his fables, too. He observed that humans would often be completely miserable if our deepest wishes were actually granted.
Be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. We think we know exactly what we need, but we constantly mistake our temporary personal preferences for universal truths.
So what does this all mean? All of this sounds beautiful in theory. Lying open as a beach, maintaining a beginner's mind, leaving space. But it means absolutely nothing if it can't survive a Tuesday evening after a stressful day at work.
True.
How do we actually practice this when we're just exhausted?
That is where the philosophy has to hit the pavement. Tony Dungy points out that these grand ideas are primarily tested in the unglamorous daily friction of our closest relationships. He leans on the biblical instruction from Ephesians to not let the sun go down on your anger.
Which is incredibly hard to do when you are 100% convinced you're right in an argument.
Oh, it's the ultimate test of the beginner's mind.
Yeah.
And Dungy isn't suggesting that you force a fake reconciliation or ignore genuine boundary violations. He's saying that you must actively fight the urge to let conflict harden into permanent resentment.
Yeah.
You have to continually choose curiosity over defensiveness. In a marriage or any long-term partnership, you're constantly presented with a choice to either grip your fist tighter around your own narrative or open your hand and actually listen to the person across from you.
And we can't separate that mental discipline from our physical reality. This brings in Thales' concept of mens sana in corpore sano, a sound mind and a sound body. And Carol Welch's work on movement as medicine is so crucial here. When we are trapped in a mental loop, when our assumptions have hardened and we're angry or frustrated, we often hold that tension physically.
We feel it in our shoulders, our jaw.
Yeah. Welch points out that physical movement can literally alter our mental state. Sometimes you cannot think your way out of a closed mind. You just have to move your body to break the physiological loop.
The physical practice mirrors the mental practice.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is how that alignment scales outward. Think about it. A sound body and a sound mind naturally create a more sound household. And a household operating with that kind of grace and openness contributes to a more sound community.
Yeah.
The private discipline of dropping your assumptions and seeing the good bones in your partner is the exact same mechanism required to build a functioning civic society. It's the same project, just applied at different scales.
It all radiates outward from that initial choice to keep the hand open. As we look at the entire scoop of this material, George Raveling poses a final, overarching summation question. What will be your life's signature?
What a question.
Right. When it's all said and done, the resume and the accomplishments, they just fade. What remains is the quality of your presence. Not what you accumulated, but how did you love? How did you show up?
It is the only metric that ultimately matters, especially when you consider the sheer improbability of our existence. The evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins makes this mathematical point that the vast majority of potential human beings will never even be born.
That's wild to think about.
It is. The odds of you existing with your specific consciousness at this exact moment in history are staggeringly close to zero. We are the extraordinarily lucky few who get to experience life at all. And therefore, because we're lucky enough to live, Dawkins notes, we are inevitably lucky enough to die.
It completely shifts impermanence from a tragedy into a gift.
Yes, the brevity of life is exactly what gives the beginner's mind its urgency. If we had infinite time, we could afford to waste centuries trapped in our own stubborn narratives. But because time is scarce, impermanence isn't something to fear. Lying open as a beach becomes an act of profound, necessary faith. Epictetus, who lived much of his early life as a slave and knew intimately how easily things can be taken away, concluded that a wise person does not grieve for the things they lack, but continuously rejoices for the things they have.
So to summarize all of this for you, the listener, prosperity is really within us. Life's essential art is not found in a single hack or a rigid set of rules. It is the daily, imperfect, ongoing attempt to stay awake. It's having the ambition to push through plateaus, paired with the wisdom to completely release your attachment to the fruit of your labor. It's owning your scars without letting them dictate your future. It's seeing the good bones in the people around you, refusing to let resentment calcify in your relationships, and finding the courage to lie open, choiceless as a beach.
It is the work of a lifetime. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've talked extensively about creating internal space for the beginner's mind to enter. But if Shoshin requires us to drop our tightest assumptions, what is a deeply held fact about yourself or your story that you are currently gripping like that fistful of candy?
Oh, that's a good question.
What might actually wash up on your shore tomorrow if you finally relax your grip, opened your hand, and just let it go?
That is the absolute perfect question to leave you with. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Go leave some space, and we'll catch you next time.